Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. You guys can see that thumbnail there. I just want to let it set in. The WHO is doing it again. The WHO is the WHO. The what is the combo couch. The where is right here. The when is right now. Let's go. We're ready. Pasta is home with mama, but in spirit, Pasta is with his good friend, James Roguski, who was one of the first to bring apart the whole story about ivermectin and how it was being suppressed and demonetized. But I can't say those things. So if you want to see what James Roguski has to say, he was referred to by David Knight as the Paul Revere of the international health regulations and the WHO treaty. Both have the same objective in a way, but using different parts of the track. And that objective is to take away our rights and give themselves ultimate control and power. James Roguski, how you doing today, brother?
Boss, you know I would never say anything that YouTube didn't like. I don't know what you're talking about. All I'm doing, all I want to do tonight is read from WHO documents, because for the last year, that's all I've been doing. And so, you know, if they don't like their own official word, then they're just going to be fact-checking themselves. But, you know, I certainly don't want to cause you trouble. I get strikes all the time on YouTube, so, you know, get out of it.
You also had your whole websites taken down over here. You've been demonetized and censored big time. And it's kind of cool in a way that I can be on with you and I can say, hey, listen, even though it's bad news, it was brought to us first. You and I did that video on ivermectin 2 months before the Dark Horse did theirs. So you were way ahead of the times with your research, and it was amazing.
You know, I've actually gotten so far away from that. You know, it's really about people versus the machine. And what you said at the outset of it, you know, you got to look inside yourself. I think this is all just a big test of, you know, what each individual person's character is. And, you know, I've been getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning to get going, to, you know, start working, just because, you know, I got to be happy with myself. Yeah. You know, I can't control what other people do. I can only control and be responsible for what I do. And there's so much work to be done. You know, if anybody thinks everything's all okay right now, you're just not paying attention.
In a nutshell, James, for doing it the Michael Scott way from The Office. Remember when they'll tell Michael Scott something like, now explain that same thing to me as if I was a 4th grader. Explain to us.
Oh, that means I got to clean it up. That means I got to clean it up. Okay.
As if we were 4th graders, what you mean by the proposed amendments to the international health regulations. And then maybe we can talk about the differences between the international health regulations and the treaty, the WHO treaty, because even though they have the same objective, which, correct me if I'm wrong, and that's to take away powers from us, the individual, and give it to themselves, I'd like to still talk about that. So go ahead and explain, as if we were 4th graders, what the proposed amendments to the international health regulations are.
Well, I'm going to have to use some 6th or 7th grade words. The international health regulations are improperly named, in my opinion. They really should be the international surveillance, monitoring, and reporting regulations. And so when I have to admit, a year ago, I'd never heard of these darn things. And so when I, you know, stumbled through the portal into the rabbit hole where all the WHO documents are, and I first read the international health regulations, some of it wasn't so bad. And I'll dive right into it. One of the things that I thought was pretty good when I read it the very first time, the first like 5 or 6 pages are a bunch of definitions of words, you know, which is important because they change the language all the time. The second one was the scope of the regulations. And it's essentially, you know, to alert other nations if there's a problem while not infringing upon international trade and travel. And so that's backwards from what most people would think. Okay. It's not about lockdowns and quarantine and curfews and you know, all that craziness. It's actually supposed to be the opposite. Individual nations just run roughshod over what they're supposed to be doing. But it's really the third article in the international health regulations that when I first read it, I was like, well, that actually sounds pretty good. And it says the implementation of these regulations shall be with full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons. And the interesting thing about the proposed amendments, many nations submitted proposed amendments, and Pasta, I don't know if you know this, but it was actually the delegation from India that proposed this specific change. They just want to cross out with full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons. And so it goes on to say afterwards that, everything that's being done in these regulations refers, comes back to, well, whatever you're doing, you have to respect the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of people. And I literally caught myself with my jaw hanging open. I'm like, Jim, your jaw's hanging open. You're reading this document. Wow, what a gift from God that came through Satan and then came through Tedros and comes to us. If this doesn't wake up the people who are not yet fully awake, right? They're trying to amend international law, and one of the first changes is just to wipe out any respect for your dignity, respect for your human rights, or respect for your fundamental freedoms. Is that okay with you, Pasta? Is that okay with the people you've been hanging out with?
No, let's break this down. So what you're saying here, and first of all, India. Wow, hold on. Before we unpack that, Mr. Narendra Modi, what's going on over there? I thought India was kind of moving towards the whole ivermectin thing in certain districts, but I would assume, James, and I haven't been to
Well,
India yet.
you got to realize none of this is about health. None of this is about health. There's no
Yeah,
discussion of anything to do about health. It's about money and surveillance and compliance and governance and
yeah,
who's the boss of who. Okay.
absolutely. This is pretty much taking away individual rights, I think, here and putting it in
Right.
the hands of others. Would that be a correct assessment right now that we're
Oh,
going to
it's
take away individual rights and put it in the hands of entities and bureaucrats? Go ahead.
exactly. And so what they're replacing that with, the new priority, is, once that's crossed out, well, now it shall be based on the principles of equity, inclusivity, coherence, and then it gets really entertaining, and in accordance with their common but differentiated responsibilities of the states parties, meaning nations, taking into consideration their social and economic development. Now, I'm a stickler for words, and Article number 1 is supposed to be all the definition of terms, but they never get around to defining equity or inclusivity or coherence or my new favorite, common but differentiated responsibilities. And really what they're talking about is economic development, because way down in appendix number 1, they literally straightforwardly say that developed nations, which is not defined, I mean, I can assume maybe rightfully or wrongfully so, is the United States actually a developed nation? Okay. They're saying that developed nations shall essentially pay for building state-of-the-art infrastructure in developing nations. Now, they don't define who's on which list, okay? And so, you've looked into crypto and various other financial things. If you're talking to somebody who's messing around in the stock market, they call stocks equities. If you buy a house and you pay down the mortgage and you put some work into it, you fix it up a little bit and you're getting ahead of the game there, you have equity in your home, right? So when they use the word equity, it's just a kinder, friendlier, gentler way of saying, we want your money. Okay. Now it's Christmas time and it's all about giving. And, the people who are wealthy, who have, by all means, if your heart is, if it's in your heart to give to somebody who's in need, that's a wonderful, beautiful thing, especially this time of year, but, any time of the year. But I don't think I want Tedros Ghebreyesus telling anybody what they should do with their resources and be
What
a
article is that in
dictator.
again?
Oh, it's all over the place. Don't go trying to find it. You'll lose your mind. Okay.
I did try to lose my
That
mind. All right, so
that
I'll get off it.
particular thing is in Annex number 1. It's way the hell down at the bottom, but also in Article 13, and this came from, of all places, Bangladesh, right? They want the WHO to essentially be in charge of the entire response across the world whenever they declare a public health emergency of international concern. A fake, PHEIC. And so
let's talk about this too. And by the way, there it is right there. If in case you're wondering, ladies and gentlemen, what he was talking about, it says it right there in the underlined first part, and it says right there, developed state parties, right? And the
right.
WHO shall offer assistance to state parties. It almost seems, James, that they're doing the same thing over here. They're telling, like, they're sending forth the smaller countries that are loyal to the West to go and propose these amendments for themselves so they don't get caught with their hands in the cookie jar. And these are the same nations that they're like, hey, man, we're going to hook you up. We're going to make sure that the developed nations are going to give you guys cash and stuff for facilities. And you're going to hook up the testing. You're going to hook up the facilities. You're going to make it easy for them to get jabs. And we're going to give you a lot of cash to do it if you guys play ball. Is that what you're sensing here with Indiana and Bangladesh maybe proposing some of these things?
I don't think I can blame Indiana on that. I'll say it was India.
Sorry, bastard.
To look at the big picture, okay, where this all really started, I think, was maybe 20 years ago, where after SARS-1 and the initial international health regulations in 2005, the various nations around the world really weren't too happy with the WHO, and they didn't want to give them any more money. And so the obligatory assessments that nations were supposed to pay, they didn't want to raise them. Okay, so they started taking money from foundations like Bill and Melinda Gates and many, many others, and then nations would give additional donations to have more influence. We would give them more money, but it would come with strings attached to it. Oh, we'll give you a couple of $100 million, but here's what we want you to do with that money, right? So the actual assessed required payment, last time I checked, for the United States is $109 million per year. Now compare that to how much we've been plowing into the Ukraine. You go, well, that's not much of anything. That's a pittance, right? That's like not even a lottery ticket these days, right? A winning lottery ticket. And so what happened is the WHO essentially got bought out by all of the many foundations who said, well, we'll give you a bunch of money, but here's what we want you to do with it. And then that money would flow into projects that they held equity in, right? And at some point, the WHO has actually put on their website that that's not really a good situation, because they can't do whatever they want to do. They have to do what the donors tell them to do, kind of like politicians, right? So what they are trying to set up, and they've already begun, is they want to set up enormous funds of money. Their budget is about $3 to $4 billion a year, and they're working to set up a $10 billion a year fund just for pandemic preparedness. Forget about all the other stuff that the WHO is supposed to be doing. All right. So they want big money. They want, World Bank pandemic fund money. I'm not making that up. That's a thing. You could go to World Bank pandemic fund. And the health minister from Indonesia, who spoke at the G20 in Bali a month or so ago, whatever it was, many people took the clip where he talked about how he wanted to have Indonesia. They submitted amendments to put forth what they call a health certificate. Most people would call it a vaccine passport, but it's more complicated than that. Yeah. The clip that most people didn't grab was afterwards. He said, well, we're very proud that we've got this $10 billion fund. And he's talking to the crowd of a bunch of business people. I said, look, this is a great business opportunity. Go invest in the companies that are going to get that money, because that's going to be a profitable investment for you. And long story short, we will not end pandemics until we make them not profitable to the companies that profit whenever there's a pandemic. Follow the money all the time.
Yeah, but you're talking about the dirtiest of dirtiest people, and they're always going to make sure. I think there's an ulterior motive here over here that people talk about, a different thing. You know, a lot of people mention the fact that they still believe that this shot is part of eugenics, and obviously we can't prove that altogether. We can make assumptions, but I think following the money is important. Let's talk really quickly about the WHO with their international health regulations, is what's going on right now. Guys, down below is the Substack where he can talk about the proposed amendments to the international health regulations, the IHR.
It's really easy to remember. It's
Yeah.
stoptheamendments.com.
Yeah,
That'll
well,
get you right to that Substack article.
it's right there down below. You can see the proposed amendments and stop the amendments. We can put that up too as well. Let's talk about the treaty versus the IHR, because a lot of people get confused and they keep on saying, "Oh, they're doing the treaty." I'm like, no, they're not doing the treaty. In New York, there were amendments they went through to the health regulations of New York, as opposed to when people were floating a bill and they heard it was really unpopular. If they were going to float a bill that would up their strengths and their powers for COVID, where they can essentially lock people in, isolate them, force them to take a jab, all these things are there. They slipped them into the health regulations because it doesn't have to go through a body. It doesn't have to go through the public. Would you say the same thing here for the international health regulations versus the WHO's treaty? Because I understand the treaty, everybody has to sign on to it. They're supposed to have public discussion. It's supposed to be done more in the public, where the international health regulations, in which you alluded to, can be done in secrecy, and then eventually they just try to amend them. It seems like they want to make sure there's no checks and balances when it comes to the international health regulations as opposed to the treaty. What's the difference between the two in your mind, even though you've said before they're on the same track to do the same, which is take away our powers, give them ultimate powers, and what they even deem as a pandemic? What's the difference between the two in your opinion?
Well, you're definitely in the ballpark. I'll flesh out some of the details. Two tracks headed in the same direction, right? And let me focus mostly on what I think is really the concerning issue, which is what you mentioned, how they want to just do regulations and sneak them in and all that sort of stuff. And so I'm going to take the treaty and I'm going to mentally just put it up, on the shelf there for a moment, because they've been public about that to a certain degree. They've given the illusion of like trying to listen to the public. I got all kinds of stories about that. Happy to talk about them. But I've been saying for months that I think it's a decoy to get people to pay attention to that, talking about that. And they've been hoping that by keeping all of the amendments to the existing regulations on the down low, keeping it quiet, that they'll just quietly, time will move along and May will roll around and boom, they're adopted. So here's what is the deal with the amendments to the existing regulations. And you're very close. It's just that it's not a state government type of thing. It's international stuff. So the international health regulations are an existing agreement that George Bush, I don't believe, actually signed it. I believe he had, an ambassador in Geneva sign off on it back in 2007. And so we're already a party to that document. We've agreed to it, that we're bound by it legally. It's a legally binding international agreement. But currently, for the most part, all it really says is we have to have a contact person. And if there's something going on that meets certain criteria, we have to alert the WHO that we've got a problem. And the WHO has to tell the world. And everything else they do is a recommendation, right? So, there's a few things in the existing document that I would nitpick that I don't personally like and I would change. But for the most part, hey, if you got a problem, you let the world know that you got a problem, right? But there aren't like enormous demands upon any nation that they have to do things. They don't have to listen to a word Tedros says. It's all hypnosis. It's all propaganda. It's all media. It's all repetition. The WHO, the WHO, the WHO. And people think, oh my God, we have to listen to them because they're the WHO.
Yeah.
They said in July that they want to have two separate tracks. They want to have the treaty and they want to have amendments to the regulations that are legally binding. So, maybe some folks are really into legal language. I did a word search on the amendments to the international health regulations, and the word shall is in there 263 times. And in legalese, shall means you must. It's not you may or you could or you should. It's you shall. So
Yeah.
essentially what it's doing is it's taking an advisory body and giving it much more power so that if Tedros speaks, people have to do what he says.
Yeah.
And the reason I think they're going through this is all they need is to, and I'll do this, convince a bunch of really tiny nations that don't have a lot of money to vote yes for this. If they get a simple majority, because China and India with 1.5 billion people, United States, Brazil, Indonesia, Nigeria, South Africa, UK, Germany, highly populated nations, they only get one vote. But pick all your tiny Caribbean nations, all your tiny Southeast Asian and African nations, they all get one vote.
Yeah.
So if they can convince 97 tiny little countries by
Okay.
however they might convince them,
Yeah.
then it's adopted.
Yeah.
And if it's
Let's.
adopted, hold on, if it's adopted by a simple majority, it's over.
Okay.
There's no signature needed. There's no Senate involved. There's no nothing. It's a done deal. The nations, individual nations could say, well, no, thank you. I just reject. But Biden is not going to do that. He's the one pushing it.
Yeah.
So this
Obviously.
could be honest. This could be honest in no time if we're not careful.
So let's take a look at more of this over here. We don't drift too far off.
Yep.
Number one is dictatorial power given to the director general. This is something we've talked about before. And then right below it, number three, I think they can go hand in hand. Dictatorial power is given to the unelected regional directors of the WHO. So in other words, what they want to do is they want to have regions, right? I believe it was 8. Is it still 8? 8 regions?
Well, the way the WHO is broken up is, the Americas, North and South, are one region. Africa, pretty much the Middle East, Europe, Asia, so forth. And so it has no relationship to how any disease might spread or anything like that. It's just a bureaucratic breakup of the member nations. They try to be, they get one from each region. Whenever they have a committee, they have 2 chair people and 4 co-chairs. So everyone around the world is supposedly part of what's going on. The issue with the amendments to the regulations is when Tedros, or whoever the dictator general might be, just decides, because there's really not much in the way of set rules that would enable him to do any proof that there actually is an emergency. Once he decides that there's an emergency and declares it, immediately he's supposed to come forth with a plan to distribute material, right? And basically he would have the power to say to any given nation, well, you have to make that and you have to send it there, and you have to make this and you have to send it there. He's kind of like the sergeant in the army, who's the supply depot. He would be in charge of the worldwide economy for pandemic response products. He would have a plan to put into action. Now I get it, because the richer nations kept all the shots to themselves. Israel and other countries, Canada and Europe, bought 10 shots for each person. And a lot of the poorer nations feel like, oh, well, we got left out. We didn't get to poison our people as much as you got to poison yours. So that's just not fair, right? And so what they're figuring now is if they can take all this money and take the know-how and the technology and the financial infrastructure and build it in these nations, they're going to be way more likely to push those poisons upon their own people. And now, I don't think the people want it, but the people who are in business and smell the contracts to build that infrastructure, they want it. And maybe they believe these things are good. They're probably out of it because they've been jabbed, but it's really, he would be in charge of the economy of the pandemic, which is astonishing.
Yeah, unelected bureaucrats telling everybody what to do. Jim, do you have any idea before we get to the next part? If in fact there's a country like, for instance, Bolsonaro told last time that they were going to amend these international health regulations. He says, I'm not playing. If you guys amend these amendments, Brazil's out of the WHO. Period. Goodbye. He's not in charge anymore. The next guy is. I think that a lot of people want to believe that the election was unfair because of those reasons, even though it was fair, as I'm telling people as an election integrity activist. And even though I don't like the decision, I still think it's up to the people of Brazil to make. That's not the only issue there, so that's not why they voted for him, but that certainly does come up. But Bolsonaro said he's going to walk. What if a smaller nation tells the WHO, hey, man, I am not playing by your rules, and it's a small nation, and the WHO feels that that particular region, they'll use the excuse that that region has to be quarantined, they have to take shots and stuff. What could possibly happen to a nation that wants to remain sovereign and doesn't play with the WHO if the WHO is not happy with them?
Well, ultimately, my perspective is everybody should exit the WHO, and that's a whole nother thing coming. ExitTheWho.com. But let me go down the list a little bit. I believe it's number 5, 6, and 7. Okay. Going back to what the health minister, who's actually a banker in Indonesia, said, he wanted to institute a quote unquote health certificate, and they also have passenger locator forms that they're proposing as well.
Yeah.
Let me just play out this scenario so you can see why this is a bigger problem than just the United States.
Which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, which is what I was pretty much getting to next as far as the health certificates and whatnot. So, James, go ahead and dive in full
Okay.
blast and go right into it.
Even if, all of the United States, woke up and everyone had a change of heart, and we told the WHO, no, we don't want anything, to do with what you're doing. If the rest of the world adopts all of this, even though we're out of it, okay, then we're trapped in the United States, because if they are all demanding that you have passenger locator forms and health certificates, whether, basically they wanted to have access to everyone's health records. And so some bureaucrat somewhere would be able to say, well, you've got to take this, that, and the other drug. You've got to have this, that, and the other injection, or you can't travel, right? So, I mean, United States, I think you're in Florida right now. I'm in, California. Not the worst place in the world to be trapped by any stretch of the imagination, okay? But man, that would really be an issue for many, 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 many people, not to mention business, right? Where you cannot travel about the planet unless you've followed their demands for how you decide what you want to do with your own body. Okay. And so the question is, how do we get people to understand that wherever they are, okay, this actually is an attempt at a global control takeover of everybody on the planet? Because all they would need to do is get a majority of the smallest of nations, strangely enough, most of whom actually depend upon tourism and travel, right? If they get the smallest of nations, a majority of them, to adopt this, it is by prior arrangement, prior agreement, prior acceptance of the international health regulations. That's global tyranny. That's totalitarian control.
Let's talk a little bit more about the infrastructure they want to implement for the fourth industrial revolution, because it's hidden in a lot of language that you've very, very much put out there for people to see. You've translated, I think, beautifully. And if you guys want to take a look at it, go to James Rogusky's Substack. He has this article out, but many more like it. It's one of the greatest resources out there. So bringing this back up, Goose, over here, we'll see number 5, right? I believe it's number 5. Let me get down on there. Number 5. Number 5, 6, and 7, right? Okay. Right. Which will lead into number 8, because you can't have the chicken without the egg, right? Or you can't have the egg without the chicken, and wherever it goes. Passenger locator forms, okay? Health certificates and health certificates too. Now, just recently they had the G20 and the B20, the business 20 and the G20 right after it. I was a little bit nervous because coming out of that, 20 nations. No, it was 19 nations. There was a nation missing, but 19 nations.
I think Russia was
Even
missing.
China. No, Russia was there. China was there. Brazil was there. Lula was there on behalf of Brazil, even though he hasn't taken office until January 1st. And all the other regular players were there, even some of the players we wouldn't expect. They all signed in for a commitment towards QR codes or digital passports for international travel. So this is already kind of being worked in different avenues, Goose. The way this thing is written out, can you explain to the audience why it is actually, even though it doesn't come out there and say we need QR codes with a certain website like they did?
No, it does. No, it does say
all right,
QR
well, here,
codes.
we'll dive in there and give us a little bit about this. Please go right ahead.
Okay. They're pretty savvy. They're pretty slick. You know, they understand the fact that the world is multifaceted. Okay. And so they don't call them vaccine passports. They don't, you know, they mention QR codes, but they've got their butts covered in the sense that if you don't have a phone, if you don't have a chip in your arm or your finger or whatever, if you print a QR code on a piece of paper, what they want are nations to adapt their database systems so that they can talk to each other. Okay. Now, I know you've been down in the belly of the beast a little bit with what I'm about to say. In the United States, it's both good and bad because we don't have a nationwide universal health database, right? I haven't been to a doctor since I was 19. I haven't been in anybody's database. They couldn't find me if they tried because I just don't go to doctors, right? But for the most part, everybody who has their database is in their doctor's file or their insurance company's file, or if they go to Medi-Cal or Medicaid or Medicare or whatever, right? It's this hodgepodge. You know, the military's got a database and this state has a database. It's a mess, right? And so what they are actually seeking to command is that every nation have their database structures set up so that they can all communicate with each other, right? If you tried to access somebody's data in the United States, it's hard to find. Now,
but wait a second, Goose, isn't that what you do between you and your doctor, your private information? How could they do this without an invasion of privacy, sir?
You know, there's people that argue about the First Amendment and that, you know, freedom of this and freedom of that and the Second Amendment, but people kind of don't get around to the Fourth Amendment, which is your right to privacy. Okay. And so, yes, what you said is exactly true. This is a direct assault on, it's not just the United States because we have a constitution. That's not how it works. Every human being has the inalienable right to privacy. You have the right to your own bodily autonomy and your own personal space. Okay. And so this is an assault on a fundamental, unalienable human right. Yes, it's the Fourth Amendment just says that our government can't do anything, you know, to infringe upon it. But that's just a statement of, you know, what unalienable means, right? When the Constitution was written, it was just a double down check to say, look, we gave a certain number of powers to the federal government, and this ain't one of them, right?
Yeah.
And so any congressperson worth their salt who's, you know, sworn an oath of office on January 3rd, coming up, if they are unwilling to defend the Constitution, they should be booted right out on their butt because that's, you know, the oath that they take. And to accept a global digital passport that would give access to our personal health records, it's a clear and total violation. Now, if you go way the hell down to page 36 and number 9, there's another one that's being violated right there. They want to give who knows how much money to the WHO so that they can possibly, this is the very first article I ever did on Substack with you. You invited me actually down onto the couch. At the global level, the WHO shall strengthen capacities to counter misinformation and disinformation. So the WHO, like the social media and the FBI and the federal government here in the United States, they're being charged with a change in international law to put their power, money, and force into countering other people's opinions and other people's facts and other people's information and other people's, other doctors' experiences. They're going to be putting global money into countering what you and I have had to say. And I don't know that you've ever been wrong on anything that I've seen. So what is truth?
Yeah.
They're putting it into international law that the WHO should put forth the effort to counter our freedom of speech. And you think there's going to be many Congress people and senators standing up against that? Well, maybe one or two, but we'll see.
Okay, so let me do this really quick because I want to make sure this is really important. Let's do it quick before we get to the next one. Let's do it quick. First off, what we're talking about right now is a total grab. This is the amendments now, ladies and gentlemen, to the IHR, the International Health Regulations, not to be confused with the treaty, which Goose believes is somewhat of a distraction. Look over here while we do this over there. But also with international health regulations, there are less steps of transparency for the public. We saw that in New York. This is on a global level. But this here, Goose, number one, is a total power grab by the WHO. In other words, handing over our sovereignty to them in the case of another pandemic. And they get to decide what a pandemic is. So it's not just going to be a COVID situation. It could be a pandemic of the pimples or something stupid, whatever, but they can call it whatever they want because they also get to define what a pandemic is. So it's a total power grab by the WHO. Number two, infrastructure for individuals for the fourth industrial revolution. What we kind of alluded to when it came to the G20 and B20, where they all committed, all nations signed on to commit to passports, international digital passports. And they want digital passports too, Goose, because so you can't get a fake freaking thing. They want you on the passport. It's like what they did in Canada. It's like you have your paperwork, but you're not on the app. Get on the app. They want to make sure that you cannot fake this and that you actually get a shot or a test before you get on a plane. And they're going to beat you over the head with the testing until you get the shot. That's what they do, right? They beat you until you submit into their ways. Third one, a complete violation of privacy. In other words, they want this linked up from country to country, from here to there. So to do that, they need your personal medical information to get this done. Is that a good assessment so far of where we're at?
I want to add one thing that you said about just a moment ago. Article 2 is an important one, and they've made a couple of little changes, okay? And the summary of it is it's the scope and the purpose of the of the regulations, right? The purpose and scope of these regulations, and I'm shortening it, okay, is to control the public health response. And it used to say restricted to public health, but now it says all risks with a potential to impact public health. And so they don't even have to show that there is an actual emergency. And they also talk about how they realize that there could be a time when there aren't injections that have been tested and shown to be not effective or whatever, right? So that's why they call them health certificates. They also have recovery certificates and prophylaxis certificates, right? It's not just a vaccine passport. It's, well, we're going to look through everything you got going on in your health, right? And you need a certificate for this and a certificate for that. It's the whole generation. You get a certificate of participation. You participated in the shot program. You're taking your drugs. You're taking your psych meds. You're doing all the things that we tell you that you have to do. Therefore, we will now let you do whatever it is you have the inherent right to do anyways.
Yep.
And it really starts with people recognizing and understanding that you only have the rights that you stand up for, right?
Yep.
When it's my spiritual view of life that God knows that this is has the potential to be a hellhole, right? And when you made a deal with your creator to come down to the planet, you said, look, I'll go, but I got to have some basic fundamental human rights, right? Because the rest of those humans are sometimes really mean and crazy. And so if you forget that you have these birthrights and you let somebody else take advantage of it, that's your fault. Don't blame the government. I think you said something earlier. Don't blame the government. Don't blame the media. Don't blame anybody. If you don't stand up for yourself and your own rights and freedoms, they will be taken away by people and organizations who don't have your best interest at heart.
If you don't use them, you're gonna lose them. But Goose, I gotta tell you something. I don't blame everybody, because we got hardcore mass programming. A lot of people don't have the time to dive into these things, and we got the number 4 issue over here: censorship. It's not what's for dinner, but it's what we're going to be force fed, Goose. Can you tell us a little bit right here for your number 9 about, at the global level, the WHO shall strengthen capacities to counter misinformation and disinformation? So we're going to hand over our freedom of speech, our freedom of the press to Tedros? Not on my watch. Go ahead, buddy.
They didn't really say too much about it other than that statement. I mean, it's that wide open. Okay. The WHO shall get rid of what they declare, as misinformation and disinformation. They have a big old website set up for quote unquote approved peer-reviewed studies, which, anybody who's actually looked into the whole industry of pharmaceutical studies and peer review process and medical and scientific journals, you realize how unbelievably corrupted it has become. It is really hard for a data geek like me to trust any data, because the way they collect it, the qualifications or criteria that they use to even collect the data, the way they set the criteria for the endpoints that they're going to study, and the worst part of it is, when a study goes bad, they don't publish it, so you never get the negative, right? It should be the law that all of this information is publicly available at all times. But if you only show the information of the studies that worked out the way you really wanted them to, okay, and you bury everything else. This whole, I'm going to digress a little bit. Way back at the end of 2020, early 2021, the publicly available information of the clinical trials, which are actually, it was actually available in 2020, when Pfizer started doing their trials for the jab, the criteria that they were testing, the endpoints, they didn't test. One of the endpoints was not, did or did not people die, right? They did not test hospitalization. They did not have a criteria for an endpoint of, severe illness and all. The only thing they were testing was basically whether or not somebody had a positive PCR test and a cough.
Yeah, that's it.
And so when it came out over the summer in the European Union that, Pfizer admitted that, they never tested for transmissibility or any, I'm like, been saying this for a year and a half. Where the hell have you been?
And Goose, you've been pointing out the hypocrisy and the clown show that is. How about when we watched the FDA certification situation, right? Where they were going to either recommend the shot moving forward or do whatever. They went over all the past information of the original Wuhan shot. Then they voted, and then they looked at the data for the Delta that was already freaking taking over the nation. Right. It was complete comical stuff. It lit a fire under your ass. I remember you were all pissed off. Yeah. But we've been seeing situations like this left and right. Even the PCR test that they admitted that the one they were using in particular, and I love to speak this way because this is coming from Goose. When people go, PCR is bad, I say, no. PCR is not used for a diagnosis, but it can be used as a stepping stone and can be used in the proper way. People are like, really? I love doing that. And I'm like, thank you, Goose. You got me. But listen, let's go over this really quick because I've got to keep it under an hour, and we are at 57 minutes. I just want to reiterate this. What we're looking at is the WHO is at it again, ladies and gentlemen, right? They're trying to re-amend the international health regulations and get everybody aboard of this whole thing. So number one, in their amendments, it's a total power grab by the WHO. They want to give themselves ultimate power. Does it make a difference what our Constitution is? In the case of another pandemic, in which they also get to decide what a pandemic is, I believe that's number 10 on your list, the way they changed the language. We've seen this the whole time, the way they changed on the CDC website too, Goose, what a pandemic is, what a vaccine is. They've changed this shit all the time. So
Yep.
they want a total power grab by the WHO. Number 2, they want infrastructure for individuals for the 4th industrial revolution. You want to travel, baby? You got to get a shot. You got to get a test. You better get a QR code. You're going to need to go get the app, whatever they say. We saw what had happened in Canada, but they want to implement these policies and infrastructure with this change in the international health regulations. Number 3, there's a complete violation. And you pointed this out, Goose. I said, this might not be there in black and white, that they can take away your privacy, but to link up these systems, the only way they can do it is if they share your personal health information. And finally, the last one, censorship. Doesn't say a lot, but it does give them the right to go after and ban or curtail or get rid of or remove what they consider to be misinformation. We already got that in California where you're living. I got the hell out. But is that a good breakdown of the 4 things needed for these new amendments to the international health regulations?
That ought to be enough to get people up off their couch and moving. I know it's great to have a conversation on the couch, but at some point you get up and you get out into the street and you say, look, this has to stop. And so I know we're going to close this up. So let me give a few things, okay? I always give my phone.
Let me make you big. Hold on.
I always give my phone number. It's 310-619-3055. Give me a phone call. Don't do it right now, okay? Because we're on air. But
give me the number again.
310-619-3055. I'm not serious.
I got to do it again one more time.
310-619-3055. You can go to Stop the Who, Leave the Who, Exit the Who, ScrewTheWho.com. All of those are .com. Personal preference is ScrewTheWho.com. You can also go to StopTheAmendments.com, or you could go to ThePeoplesAmendments.com, which I've been working on for a couple of months, knowing that this day was coming. Maybe we can talk about that next time. It's one thing to say, no, we don't want you to do what you're doing. But I think that everybody needs to know what it is they stand for and what it is they should be fighting for. It's one thing to oppose and be against something, but you got to stand for something. So go to thepeoplesamendments.com and tell me if you disagree with any of that. I have a Zoom every day at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Everyone is invited to join. The link is right there on either of those websites, stoptheamendments.com or thepeoplesamendments.com. I'm not serious about this, people. Thepeoplesamendments.com and stoptheamendments.com is like two polar opposites. If people see what the WHO is doing, all you got to do is read the first line. They want to eliminate respect for your dignity, your human rights, and your fundamental freedoms. And if you're okay with that, have a good Christmas, have a good New Year's. Might be the last one you get.
James Roguski, my man, my good friend. I love you, brother. We got your number up. We got your links up. Let's go out there, guys. Let's stop the WHO. He's been on top of this. They censored him early. They took down his websites, but he kept fighting strong. And I got to say, I think it's awesome, Goose, that you're doing this because we are considered leftist of sorts. I mean, I don't want to put us in a box or whatever, but this isn't about left or right. This isn't about politics, even though they made it about this. This is about our life. This is about our health. This is about everything, our freedoms. I mean, there's so many things that go into this. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for being a great friend. And thank you for being a great fighter for freedom. And I don't want to sound too patriot over here, but just for the human race, as Bernie Sanders would say when we one time followed him, the human race. Goose, thank you so much. I love you, brother. Keep in touch and come back and give us any new updates when you hear them.
Say hi to your mom. Say hi to Fee and Johnny. Love you, Pasta. Thanks.
Love you too, guys. That's it. James Roguski, he is there, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this edition of the Convo Couch Late Night. You can call the Goose there. His number is 310-619-3055. Give him a ring. He'll speak to you. He's left it open to everybody. He's been on many shows, guys. He's doing a lot of work. I can't thank him enough for his friendship and what he's bringing to the table. So go ahead and give him a call. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, if you can go over to our Rockfin if you want, and you got a few extra dollars for $14.99, you can be a premium subscriber. Don't worry. In the beginning of the year, we're going to get our own special price for an individual subscriber directly to the Convo Couch, meaning you won't get everybody else's information for free, but we'll make it cheaper for you so you can show your love and you can keep independent media going. That's it for today. Pasta Jar Dooley here, the Convo Couch. We're out. I'll be back on Monday. I'm taking the next couple days off. I got to go hang out with moms, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you for everything, and thank you for supporting independent media. I'll see you Monday. Happy Christmas. Merry New Year.